Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the El Cajon City Council meeting. The meeting is now called to order, and I'd like to ask the city clerk to call the roll.
All council members are present.
Thank you. I see Joel Scalzetti in the audience. Joel, would you lead us to the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
I'd be honored.
Would you all be willing to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, and then after that, remain standing for a brief moment of silence?
Lift right hand over your heart. Ready? Begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. All right. The city clerk posted orders of adjournment of the February 11th, 2020 meeting and the agenda of the February 25th, 2020 meeting in accordance with state law, council, and housing authority policy. There are no presentations on today's agenda. Staff, do you have any agenda changes?
Mr. Mayor, we have no changes to the agenda.
Council, any agenda changes? All right, that brings us to consent items. Consent items are routine matters enacted by one motion according to the recommendation listed below. With the concurrence of the City Council, a council member or person in attendance may request discussion of a consent item at this time. Council members, do you wish to pull any consent items? Staff?
No, sir.
Angela, do we have any speakers for consent items?
We have no cards, sir.
I'd like to make a motion then to approve the consent items.
Second.
Moved and seconded, please vote.
Motion carries by unanimous vote.
We're now at public comment. At this time, any person may address a matter within the jurisdiction of the City Council, Housing Authority, successor agency to the El Cajon Redevelopment Agency that is not on the agenda. Comments related to items on today's agenda are to be taken at the time the item is heard. State law prohibits discussion or action on items not on the agenda. However, City Council and Housing Authority members may briefly respond to statements or questions. An item may be placed on a future agenda. Angela, do we have any cards under public comment?
Yes, sir. We have two speakers. The first one is Tim Jengst.
Hello, sir. Welcome.
Thanks. Okay.
Sir, would you mind pulling the microphone down so we can hear you? Thank you.
How's this?
Just
Is
in
that
front of your
okay?
mouth. Thanks.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. I have a couple items. My first item is concerns the traffic signal at Chase and South Magnolia.
Okay.
You guys got it where it's at by Chase Elementary?
Now I got it in my head, yeah.
Okay. I'm sure you are all aware of the traffic problems at this intersection. I'd like to focus on the traffic problems as they relate to the elementary school. At the beginning and end of the school day, there is a great deal of foot traffic and vehicle traffic resulting in gridlock. This problem is compounded by inconsiderate parents illegally parking, stopping in the middle of the street in order to load and unload students in traffic, and also driving in the wrong direction on northbound Magnolia caused by the illegal parkers. This is with kids walking in the crosswalk all at the same time. All this stuff's going on. And I understand that the city is planning to modify this traffic signal. I know a little bit about this kind of stuff, and I agree that a modification is warranted. Unfortunately, I do not think that the traffic signal modification is the answer. The problem in this case is not how well the traffic signal works. The problem is too many cars. No matter how well this signal performs, the sheer volume of traffic during these times will largely remain the same. The answer to this problem of too many cars is storage. It's not the traffic signal. There is available storage. The storage in this case is on the school's own property. The school has a large swath of land that can be used for storage, pickup, and drop off of students. This is a huge area where the parents could drive into the school, drive all the way around the field, and have parking, on the borders, and the kids would be so much safer because they would be exiting out the back, not dealing with the traffic and the illegal activity by the drivers on the main street. In any case, let me get back to where my little speech here. Additionally, okay, wait a minute. Here we go.
Sir,
Yes.
you're out of time, but I'm curious about this, so I want you to go ahead and finish, but I just wanted to acknowledge that we've run out of time, but go ahead and finish, because sounds like a very important issue.
It is. Okay. To be clear, this is not a city of El Cajon problem. It is a school problem. The school has ample property to provide the necessary access. I am stating this in a public forum so the school understands that they alone have the wherewithal to solve this problem, and I hope they get it done before something bad happens. Also, we need to get the school to police parents who are illegally parking on Magnolia, forcing drivers to drive against traffic. Okay, that's it.
Okay, Greg, got a couple questions, and
Yes.
Council may have some questions. First off, have you talked to David Marachero at the district office, or have you talked to the principal of the school about this?
I have not.
I think that would be a good first step. I think the city can help you with that, and I'm going to have somebody from the city meet with you right now and get your contact information so that we can start working on this problem.
I can drop off this little speech, too, so they could look
Be
at
helpful, yeah. And then as far as the one thing I would disagree with you about is that we do have some responsibility when it comes to parking illegally, and so we're going to make sure that our police officers know that that's an issue and see what they can do about it. Graham, are you prepared to talk at all about this modification he's talking about?
I know that school very well. I know what he's talking about. There is a lot of storage. We need to assess the situation first before we invest capital dollars into something.
He had he had mentioned that there was a change that was coming. Did you say that?
There's a small modification, from what I understand. They're trying to get a small modification for the traffic signal.
There's some traffic signal adjustments that are going on that entire area.
All right. Well, ask the other council members if they have questions, then we'll come back to you, Graham. Graham, would you be willing to assign somebody to work with this gentleman over this, and then
Absolutely.
Would you be willing to come back and report to the council what has happened?
Yes, we can do that.
Sir, I think this is going to go a long way to resolve this issue. Give it a little bit of time and go through the process. And if it doesn't, would you be willing to come back and let us know? You know what? Would you be willing to come back either way? If it's working, great. If it's not working, let us know. Yes, sir. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day to come to a council meeting in the middle of the day and let us know. A lot of times we don't know things are problems unless somebody like you comes and tells us.
Yeah, on the policing, I'm sure that the police has, what they can do. But look, these people, the school, it's the parents that are doing all this stuff. The cops come once in a while and do a little something, and then, but it's a daily thing. And I think that they could police a lot themselves. It's just to me. That's just me. But
my hunch is there's a lot we can do to make the situation better.
Yes, sir.
Council, any more questions? Thank you, sir, for coming.
I have
do you have one more thing you want to say?
I have a separate issue, if you don't mind. It's just a follow-up. You guys asked me to come back and give a follow-up.
Sure.
I was here before. I had a bad prostitution problem on my
I remember,
block.
yeah.
So here's my update on the prostitution that was going on the street in front of my house. This is on South Magnolia, south of Chase, just above the elementary school, but on Magnolia. Okay, so to refresh your memory, I was trying to kick these people out of my area there, this prostitution, and it just got bigger and bigger, and I wasn't able to keep up with it, and I asked you all to help me out, and I didn't even get home from this meeting, and I was stopped outside by the police, and they came up with a plan to start doing the reports out there, and it wasn't much, but that was all that was necessary. They got the idea, and it wasn't just me against them, because at a certain point they kind of go, well, this skinny little guy, we don't really pay attention to him. But when the police came, it really helped out, and now also Raul. I'd like to thank Raul also from, I believe, traffic engineering. They're putting a street light there. That place is dark at night. In any case, I just want to let you all know that there's a whole lot less sex going on in the cars in front of my house. Thanks to you guys. And also, again, thank you to the police, and thanks to Raul.
Well, thanks to you. If you hadn't come up and spoken up, it would be the same as it was.
Okay, this is the same thing, but it's like on a related deal. Okay, that same area, they have a development going in, right behind Chase Elementary, that huge subdivision that's going in. You guys are aware of it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, that guy, the developer, has bought one more house, okay? And that house sits there now abandoned, and he's doing work. But last time there was 3 abandoned houses there, and I had to fight with 25 homeless guys living there all the time, hypodermic needles, hookers, everything. I haven't asked him, but I'm hoping that somebody could expedite the demolition, just so that if that house is left alone, it's going to be an attractive nuisance for the bad guys that come in there. And it was the last time they had abandoned houses on that property. They had 3 abandoned houses, and I was fighting. They finally ended up in a huge fire during school hours next door to Chase Elementary. And thank God that was the end of this problem. But the amount of people that go into those abandoned houses is unbelievable, and it's unstoppable once they're in. So I'm just hoping that, number one, he wants to tear it down, and number 2, y'all can help him expedite that thing so that I don't have to deal with the homeless people.
Graham, could you address that issue as well?
We'll look into see where we're at with the permit. I don't know where we're at, but if there's an opportunity to expedite, we will.
Okay.
If there's a building to be torn down, we don't hold that back, because it's a good thing for the community.
Oh, good. Thanks a lot, guys. Do I just go now, or do I have to join somebody?
Somebody's going to meet with you. If you sit down here, somebody will talk to you, get your information, and we'll see you again at a later date. You tell us how much better things are, I hope.
Perfect. Thank you.
The last speaker is Joel Scalzitti.
Hi, Joel. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Council Member. My name is Joel Scalzitti. For you who don't know who I am, I have a little donut shop downtown El Cajon, a donut and deli. And about a year and a half ago, I decided to bring my business here to El Cajon. I was really impressed with the downtown promenade and the feel that downtown had. I worked really hard and anxiously with several thousands and thousands of dollars to bring a nice character type shop to downtown so people can come and enjoy it. But quickly after I opened, I got the reality that there's some challenges to downtown El Cajon, and being part of in my life, I see things as being part of the solution instead of just a problem. I try to attack those challenges. And what I see is it's hard to get. There's a number of cars that come downtown every day, all day long, and I just was trying to grasp some of those people in and get them to stop, get them to walk downtown, get them to enjoy a little donut, a sandwich on the promenade, a walk in the park. So I put some signs up, some little things that I have at my other locations also, things that the kids enjoy, things that they can go out and take a picture in front of and smile and have their parents enjoy it and make a little memory of downtown. But soon after that, I've got violations and citations that I didn't really understand. Some of the things that they sent me, there were examples of signs that were attractive and signs that were unattractive. And to me, they all kind of look similar in the model that they were. And I understand that we need a little character downtown. And I brought this sign that I have that has character, that brings kids out to want their picture in front of it. I guess it just doesn't fit inside some of the preferences that you have downtown. And I'm just a little confused on what is an attractive, to me, I think my sign's attractive, but what is an unattractive sign and what is an attractive sign? They sent me some examples, but I really just need some help downtown. I need some help where if there's something that doesn't fit in, that they would come and say, hey, Joel, come up to my office. Let's see if we can get you to kind of still achieve what you want to achieve and still stay inside the lines. I know that some of your staff goes by my shop 2 and 3 times a week, and I just didn't get that hometown feel of, hey, that maybe doesn't fit in, but let's talk about something. Instead, I'm just getting, citations that scare you a little bit of $1,000 per day violations. And to me, I'm just working really, really hard at just trying to bring commerce and memories and things and character to our downtown. So I'm really respectfully asking you to see if we can get a meeting together, see if we can change some of the maybe archaic or maybe just preferences of downtown to add a little character so we can survive downtown financially in our businesses and we can create something that's wanted to be downtown. I appreciate your time today.
Well, hold tight for a second, Joel. Graham?
A couple things. First of all, it's my understanding that no citations have been issued. That could be wrong, but I know there's been 2 sort of in-store visits, and I think we've sent 2 warning letters. And it does talk about if we have to cite, then there will be, these are the penalties of the citation. But I don't believe a citation has been issued. I could be wrong. I also understand that the standards by which signs are regulated in the downtown were a bit of a negotiation between the downtown partnership and the city council at the time. I think the course of action that I'd recommend to Mr. Scalzetti is that he actually engage the downtown business partnership and see if they want to reopen that, and then we can work with them as a whole rather than piecemeal one store at a time. I think that would be the goal to have a uniform sign program is so there would be some level of uniformity, but there is some value in having some variation as well. But I would not recommend that the city council engage in sort of one business at a time changes to the municipal code. This really should be held at a more of a holistic approach. That's at least my recommendation.
Do you know the folks at Downtown Business Partnership?
No, I don't. I've been kind of focusing on business. I've never been approached by the downtown. I never asked for redevelopment money. I'm just trying to really strive at keeping my business kind of going. Every sign is not going to fit in just exactly what everybody else's signs. That's why their signs are just a little different variations. That adds character. So, like I said, I wouldn't want you guys to change the policy if there is a policy. Like I said, I had some examples they sent me. I just was wondering if we could add some character and see if we can all live inside the lines together. So all I would really request is just kind of a sit down with maybe Graham and and Tony and see if we can come up with something that's acceptable. I don't know who the redevelopment or economic, what is it called?
So there's a group called the Downtown Business Partnership. You know that this area is a business improvement district. So the group that runs it, they have a lot to do with the regulations that we have there as far as signage and other things that have to do with the downtown area. I think it's actually a good idea to talk with them too about this. And I don't think what you're proposing is a bad idea. There's always room for improvement in these kind of things. Graham, could you help him facilitate that? Get him the contact information of the people he needs to talk to. Let's start with that. Daryl Priest is running that. He's obviously a business friendly guy. Let's see how that goes. And if you then it's not working and you need to bump it up to a higher level, we can always do that.
Okay.
But don't give up on it. I think what you're asking for is reasonable, and we should all constantly be looking at what options we have.
I appreciate that, and that's just sort of the solutions that I need, the options that I need, is to have avenues where we can go and try to figure things out just before letters and citations that frustrate other business people, not just me.
Well, I know that can be scary when the government. Every time I see a letter from the IRS, I start to sweat. I get it. Let me see if there's any questions, Mr. Goebel.
It's a general comment on just the sign atmosphere downtown. The struggle as a small business owner is you have cars driving by, but you don't really know what's there for a business district. You gotta take your eyes off the road and look up on the side because there's nothing at eye level. So I'm sympathetic to a sign that has some character, some personality that says, wow, that's really cool. That's a such and such a shop. That's a such and such a shop, without having to look 20 feet up and take my eyes off the road. I think that kind of sign character adds life to a community, especially when we're kind of hoping people will get out of their cars and walk, but they don't know if they don't see at eye level what kind of things they are. With that said, there's also a balance. You don't want to see a big toy inflatable mattress sitting on the side of a sidewalk indicating it's a furniture store. There's a balance. I'm more concerned about all these LED lights that seem to rim the windows and the flashing signs and things like that. That looks more gaudy than a pink donut sign which says we sell donuts here. So I think getting together with the Downtown Partnership is a great idea. Let's tighten some things up and make some more things more flexible with community character.
Any other comments or thoughts? Phil?
No, I think it's a great idea. I mean, we've invested a lot of capital in redoing the Magnolia. I think we all want to see the downtown thrive. So listening to our businesses downtown is part of that equation. And, yeah, starting with the Downtown Business Partnership, which seems to coalesce, I think that's a great start, and I'm all for it. So, yeah.
All right, well, you may have just volunteered to lead this whole effort. So, so I appreciate you coming and standing up. Look, go through the process and come back and let us know how it's going.
I appreciate it. Thank you for all your time.
I'm sure that we can find a way that everybody wins.
I'm sure we can too. That's why we're here. Thank you.
Hey, did you bring donuts with you today?
I didn't, but I'm just steps away, and I know you guys got a short agenda, so I'll see you all then there.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I was a little afraid he's going to call me out as being one of the guys that comes there 3 times a week. But thanks, everybody. So any more cards?
No more cards, sir.
Okay. We are now at public hearings. Item 9 is for delinquent refuse collection charges. And staff, would you tell us about this, please? Yeah, we did.
Good afternoon, Mayor and City Council members. Happy to be here. I'm Dirk Epperson, your Director of Public Works. and happy to introduce this item to you today. As you may be accustomed, normally we have two items that are very similar, a refuse and a sewer, delinquent sewer charges. This time around, we don't have our sewer delinquent charges, so and the reason behind that is because we're in the process of selecting a long-term solution for sewer billing options. So because of that, we are not incurring any late penalties with the billing, at least this go-round. So we're having a little grace period there. So there aren't any delinquent sewer charges this month. So I bring to you the delinquent refuge collection charges, and just as a little background, we sent out 685 lien notices totaling $100,669.69. And since we sent out those notices, 253 of them have been paid off, leaving a balance as of yesterday of 432 delinquent accounts totaling $64,745.04. And so before you today is that ratification and for your vote, and we ask you to please consider that. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dirk. Appreciate that. Are there any speaker cards on this item?
No card, sir.
All right. Babe, do we need to close the public hearing then with no cards? Yeah. Okay, so I make a motion then to close the public hearing? Second. Move to second, please vote.
Motion carries by unanimous vote.
Gentlemen, any discussion, or somebody like to make a motion?
The next resolution.
Second.
All right, moved and seconded, please vote.
Motion carries by unanimous vote.
Under administrative reports, we have one item regarding strategies to address unfunded pension liabilities. And staff, would you please tell us about this?
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. For years, city councils and city staffs around the state have been talking about the challenge of increase in pension costs. Much of this is driven by a specific jurisdiction's unfunded pension liability. El Cajon has not been dissimilar from all of those other cities. We've been talking about it. We've hired consultants over the years to understand it. This city council was very proactive and fiscally disciplined and has been putting money away year after year when there's some reserve or surplus in the reserves, and has socked away about $8 million, which is pretty rare for a lot of cities. Unfortunately, that $8 million is just sitting in a bank account that earns about 2% interest on a good day. So it's not doing a lot of good. We've set this money aside without doing much. But one of the challenges is that every analysis that we've run, by paying that $8 million and losing all that security, it doesn't make much of a difference in the massive amount of pension liability that we have. So it's hard to give up that much money in exchange for nothing without really seeing a big impact. One of the things that the city council did earlier this year was direct staff to hire a firm, Urban Futures, to look at how to utilize not only that money but other policies and other tools that are available in the toolbox to sort of tackle this pension problem. And let's be honest, it's not going to go away. There's no magic bullet. There's no magic wand that can just make it happen. But there are some strategies that we can start taking bigger bites at this massive elephant that we are trying to consume. So what we've done is we've worked with Urban Futures staff, and we've identified some recommendations that we think make sense for this city. We'd like to present those. Julio Morales, director with Urban Futures, is going to kind of take over the presentation from here, talk about some of the ideas that we've discussed, and then some strategies that we're recommending that the City Council take action on. As he concludes, one of the last slides you'll see is a list of 4 recommendations, which are also included in the staff report, that we'd like to get some dialogue and some direction from the council. With that, Mr. Morales.
Thank you, Graham. Good afternoon, Mayor, members of the City Council. I guess today's conversation is going to be how to eat this elephant. So if I may, we're going to commence on this process. So I'm going to quickly just go over some basic numbers to get a fundamental, and then kind of go over an approach that we'd like to take, and then provide some specific recommendations. So collectively, you have a $204 million liability. They're broken up between your miscellaneous plan and your safety plan because they get different benefits. But the way you kind of take a look at the pie, the unfunded liability is that gray amount. An actuary determines how much you owe in total. You have market value assets, so the net in, for example, for the green, which is your miscellaneous, is $77 million. And for your safety plan, you have a total liability of $329 million. You have assets of $203 million. So you have an unfunded portion of $126 million. Collectively, it comes out to $204 million. It's important for you to note there really are two parts of your pension liability. One part is your normal costs. I'm going to liken it to your water bill or your electrical bill. That's the current month's payment. That's what the current employees earn in the current year. And the UAL, the part in the gray that we're talking about, is a past due payment. Now, in 2013, CalPERS had PEPRA reform, which you know they lowered the benefit ratio that employees would get paid. In addition to that, they started a whole new program of fiscal transparency and changed the way that people looked at the UAL. So now you pay a percentage of payroll for your current employees, and we have essentially a series of loan payments for the past due amount. So this UAL is comprised of a series of payments, and right now you have about $12 million worth of payments due, and these are fixed dollar payments. That's important to note because they're going to go up to $21 million. Okay, so right now we're at 12, they're going up to $21 million. And as Graham noted, $8 million would not do much to alleviate that in any individual year. It's a great amount to start with, and we think it's a great tool in the future, but I think we have to take a look at some other solutions. I'm going to go real quickly to talk about the numbers and go back just to that slide so you can understand. Each year, and this is an important thing to note, CalPERS essentially adjusts your balance, just like you would with any utility. Oh, last month you paid $200, you owed $200, great, you're due, but now you didn't pay enough in the current bill. So what happened is, and this was expected, you went from $185 million to $204 million. Now, this was expected for the most part. So what we're going to explain to you is that your UAL, your unfunded liability, is really comprised of a series of loans. And if you can think of it as a series of loans, I think it's a lot easier to understand. All those loans have different terms. As you can see the term there, 5, 20, 30 years and the like. And they have different amounts in payments. You also have some credits. So if you want to take a look at it differently, you might say that you have a series of 40 loans or 40 credit cards, all at 7%, however you want to see that, with different monthly payments, or in this case, annual payments. Now, last year, in 2018, you had a new actuarial valuation, and CalPERS did three things. Number two was the discount rate, which everyone was anticipating. That was the final step from 7.25% to 7%. But in addition, they changed the methodology. What they're really doing is getting more and more accurate projections. Unfortunately, sometimes that costs more money. So, for example, they tracked historical earnings. Sometimes you may have an employee like Graham, who was working as a city manager, retires and then decides to take another position as a, let's say, management analyst 1, because he just loves working in a department. Well, the way the model works in their projections, his salary would go one way and be cut in half, but the projections would use his last year's salary, his last 3 years. What they now do is take historical earnings tracking, so it's more accurate. Also, the model, instead of doing semi-annual tracking, now does it on a monthly basis. Long story short, it ends up getting more accurate projections, but it didn't work to anyone's advantage. The last part, as you may know, and this is the part that you will have an adjustment each and every year, is the CalPERS return. Now, you got a credit for CalPERS return last year. They returned 8.6%, and the hurdle rate or benchmark rate is 7%. So every year that you exceed 7%, you get a credit. Every year you're below, you get an additional base added on. Now, I don't know what happened yesterday. I didn't figure out what happened in the market today as of close, but we lost all of our earnings for the calendar year last year. Now, if you ended up there, we'd probably be about 5% for the year, so you'd add another base. However, recuperate for the end of the year, we could end up at the same level or another credit. So it all depends. But the one thing that is consistent is each and every year, no matter what, CalPERS makes an adjustment for investment performance as well as some other factors. So what we did is we met with staff. We talked about a number of factors. And I think one of the things is this is a really big elephant, and you need a number of solutions on how to cut it and consume this all at once. And there is no magic pill. It cannot be taken care of. And I think the most important thing that the rating agencies always want you to know is that even if you ate that whole elephant, there might be more elephant servings coming later on. Okay? That they want you to know that there's additional bases. So even if you pay off that 204, a couple of years from now, you could get an additional base for another $5 or $10 million. What that really means is that this is a long-term problem that we have to address and have to think of solutions, not as just one-time fixes, but systematic ways of approaching it. So one of the things we do is we develop a pension model. We looked at some recession scenarios, and we've tried to develop a comprehensive plan. And today we're coming up with initial steps, start moving forward on that process. Probably the key component of that is developing a pension funding plan, because we'll come up with financial terms, but we're going to need a policy document both for the staff and for the council to serve as a guideline in the future, because this issue is going to be along more than 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 city councils. So you're going to need a policy document, which can be and should be revised from time to time, that's going to serve as the guiding principles of how you're going to address these financial issues. And primarily, you'll describe the liability. You will talk about how you're going to allocate resources, namely at the end of the year if you have any excess monies or reserves. It's always this issue because there's a project you want to finance, but at the same time, this financing requires long-term financial discipline. So it's always going to be this issue, okay, we ended up with $2 million extra. Where should it go? How much of it should go towards the pension liability? How big is that pension liability? You can stop me at any point if you have any questions, by the way. Okay. So that's part of the direction we're going to ask to help draft that funding policy, and we'll come back with a fleshed out policy in an upcoming meeting. Correct, Graham? So we came up and looked at 7 pension funding solutions. I'll talk about 3 or 4 of them today. One is allocation among funds, and I believe you were talking about how much, for example, of your UAL you allocate towards your enterprise, your water sewer funds. A synthetic fresh start with targeting, I'll give you an illustration, but basically all those bases that you have with CalPERS when you make a payment, this is going to be hard, we're not going to do that. They're going to tell you which one do you apply to, a 5-year base or a 28-year base or a 30-year base. So the model helps you determine what the financial savings are. Or in other words, you get to do this more surgically than just applying, we sent $1 million. CalPERS says, what do you want to do, maximize cash flow savings or look at the most immediate budgetary impact? We'll also look at tax-exempt exchange and pension obligation bonds. And this last concept that fits in with the pension funding policy is the notion of bootstrapping. So if you do save money, either through one of these mechanisms or somewhere else, it's the idea of recycling those savings back in to pay down your loan. This is not any different from paying down your home mortgage or your credit card sooner or faster. But in both cases, it requires financial discipline and a plan. So the points that I think we're going to have to discuss is, one, the pension stabilization fund that Graham mentioned. You have $8 million in that fund, but it's only earning 2%. Placing it into a 115 trust is a good suggestion because it has 2 primary advantages. One, it places the money in a restricted trust. That's what the 115 designated is. So it can only be used for pension purposes. Secondly, and more importantly, it now can earn a higher yield because you can invest it in the proceeds outside of the California Investment Code, which is just 5-year bonds. Now you can do some combination of bond and equity to help gain a greater yield. We'll talk about the POB validation process, the use of one-time reserves of money. All of these things are going to have to be in future dialogues, but we wanted to set the table now to have you thinking about this. Available projects for CIP projects for a concept known as tax-exempt exchange, which is essentially a tax-exempt POB. Risk mitigation strategies for the issuance of POBs, and I think a really critical one that we're going to have to think about, because your payments peak in 2031 and the expiration of your sales tax is 2029. And this is what this prescient long-term planning thinks about. Hey, we got these payments coming due right at that same time. This sales tax is either going to have to be renewed beforehand or think about what you're going to do with that. And the last are recession scenarios, because unfortunately, if anything scared me is what happened yesterday and the likelihood that you can have an adjustment in the market, one bad bit of news, and all of a sudden we're going to have to deal with a larger UL and greater payments. So one of the first things we take a look at is how much you have in reserves. We established that $8 million. The first thing we talked about is that money is underperforming in a regular government account, should be placed in 115 trust that allows you to, one, restrict it legally, and two, earn more money. So the recommendation was to place it on 115 trust. And then also to establish those certain policies as to how you would use that. I think we can come up to that, have that discussion some point in the future, but our first recommendation was to take a look at that. Yes?
Now, is there a substantial increase in risk when we go over to 115 trust? Because usually there's some relationship between risk and rate of return.
Council member, you said it absolutely correctly. Business school would tell you the exact same thing. You have a greater volatility when you have a higher risk profile, but you usually have about 3 investment choices. Usually there's a low, moderate, and higher risk, and still all of it is less than CalPERS. And what you're doing is shifting basically from almost all fixed income to a little bit more equity. So it would depend on what your strategy would be. And even then, I would suggest that you don't place it all in one strategy, but you ladder portions of it. A certain portion that you're not going to use right away, that you put in a slightly, like a moderate investment, and another portion that you would put in the lower and maybe even some in stable value. So the answer is yes, it depends, and you can look at a strategy on how you invest that.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. So I think we kind of went ahead right there. That was my next slide. But once again, I'll go over the Pension Stabilization Fund. The important part is we can talk about the investment strategy, but what we want to have is direction to allocate the monies in there and then designate that policy. But the last point was really to take a look at a diversified investment holding so we mitigate some of that risk or reduce the risk. That, of course, would also be done in conjunction with the cash flow that you project. So I'm going to hand it over to Brian Forbath, who works with Stratton, Yucca, Carlson, and Roth. He is the bond counsel to work on this transaction. But I'll note one thing. In order to issue pension obligation bonds, you have to go through a validation proceeding. And I have coined the term that a validation proceeding is like a building permit. It is a process that you have to go through additional proceedings to actually get authority to issue these pension obligation bonds. And with that stating, understanding that we have to go through this process initially to get legal authorization, and then go back, and we're going to have to go back 2 more times to the City Council in order to issue POBs. So what we're doing today is commencing this process. If I may, I'm going to introduce Brian Forbath.
Brian, welcome.
Good afternoon, Mayor Wells, council members. Brian Forbath from Stratton, Yucca, Carlson, Ralph. Pleasure to be here in front of you this afternoon. So as Mr. Morales said, the validation process is something that's required for the issuance of pension obligation bonds in the state of California. And essentially what happens is the city essentially files essentially a lawsuit that essentially sues itself to prove to the court, to get a judgment that the obligations of the city to make debt service payments on the pension obligation bonds are an obligation imposed by law. Essentially, you're refunding the existing obligations to PERS with a new debt instrument. And with the judicial validation proceedings, there is not a requirement for a vote of the people. It's exempt from the constitutional debt limit as an obligation imposed by law. So the whole process takes about 90 to 120 days to go through, and we would file an action in Superior Court at your direction. The next step really would be if the presentation after today is that the council decides they want to move forward, we would come back at a subsequent council meeting with the various legal documents and a resolution authorizing the issuance of pension obligation bonds and directing staff to file a judicial validation action in the court. And that would sort of kick off the process. And then on this next slide, you can sort of see the time frame of walking through it. It is sort of a long, drawn-out process that it takes. And at the end of the process, assuming we get a court to validate the bonds, there would be a final approval of the city council at that point in time to approve what we would call an offering document or official statement for the bonds. And that is sort of the council's sort of final go, no-go on whether or not to issue the pension obligation bonds, how much you want to issue, and to make whatever other decisions at that time. So even if you decide to move forward and institute the validation proceedings, it's not that you're giving a full-hearted blessing to move forward at that time. There's a second bite at the apple at it. With that, I'd be more than happy to answer any other questions you have.
Gentlemen, any questions? Yeah. I'll start Gary and go to Steve.
I've got about 3 questions. Sure. First is, are these unsecured?
They are unsecured obligations of the city. They're not secured by, normally a city would issue debt through a lease structure, lease revenue bonds or certificates of participation. This will be an unsecured obligation of the city.
And given that we're borrowing money from CalPERS at 7%, what would I know it's an estimate on your part, but what would the market rate on those bonds be as of today, let's say?
About 3.5 is a good rule of thumb right now.
So essentially we'd be borrowing money at 3.5
Yes.
to pay off a 7% loan.
Yes.
So it's kind of like refinancing your house at a lower rate, except
Exactly
it's not secured.
like that. Yes.
Okay.
And that is the legal theory behind the validation, is that you have this obligation imposed by law already to CalPERS, and all we're simply doing is refinancing that obligation with these bonds. So the bonds are stepping into the shoes of the obligation to CalPERS.
Isn't this what the County of San Diego did a number of years ago?
Yes, County of San Diego's done it. There's City of San Diego has pension obligation bonds. There's been a lot, yeah.
Downside on this?
There's one downside to issuing them, which is if you invest the monies all at one time and you have an immediate loss in the money, you lose the advantage of some of your savings. I think in a future date we will talk about the kind of risks and how to mitigate that. But essentially, you'll still have the cash flow savings. So on one side, the cash flow savings is pretty much locked in. The other looks at how the money performs the CalPERS over time. And you're never quite certain until the end of that 25, 30-year period. But the most significant risk is if you have an immediate loss, like if you'd issued bonds yesterday or 2 days ago, and you have that immediate one-time loss, a lot of the savings advantage goes away. But there are some mitigation measures you can take.
I want to be clear on something. So we're taking this money. Are we using it to pay down our loan from CalPERS, or are we using it to go out in the market and buy investments?
No, you by law, you're required to provide the money to CalPERS. Otherwise, you're not extinguishing that loan. So you're not taking an investment risk yourself. You're taking the money and giving it to CalPERS and essentially eliminating your loan liability. And they then, in turn, invest it like all other proceeds that you send to them.
The difference is you're borrowing money at 3.5% rather than 7%.
Yes, that's absolutely correct.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a couple questions. I want to make sure that we're not borrowing money. That we're not incurring additional debt. That the CalPERS thing kind of sounds like paper debt, but the POB sounds like real debt. How can you clarify that?
That's an argument that people made about 10 years ago. I think the most important comment is that this liability is now on your books. GASB 68 states it, and you'll see $200 million on your books, on your balance sheet. So it's a real loan. That's one. Two, and more importantly, CalPERS has fixed dollar payments that you're required to make. So that acts and smells and looks like a loan. As much as I've been a bond guy 25 years, that looks like one. They have a 7% payment. I can't get this to go backwards. So it's not a paper liability. It's already a liability. You're, in fact, required to make these fixed dollar payments right here. Those are scheduled fixed dollar payments.
So in the same way that I pay a mortgage, cash out of pocket, and if I refinance that mortgage, I'm still cash out of pocket, just at a lower interest rate and a lower payment?
Exactly what you said. Yes, sir.
And we should really look at being good with the public's money to say if we save interest, we should pour that back in to lower the principal on the mortgage that we owe?
Absolutely. And therein, when we come to the final structure and objective, we'll take that into account as well as the other components you might run into in the future. Recall that that's your current liability. So I think one of the things you have to anticipate is that you may have additional bases added on in the future. And what this would ideally set you up in a position is to reset the table at zero, and now you're able to pay, I have a new $2 million base. Let's use our surplus reserves this year to pay that off in full, so I don't end up paying $5 million in total payments.
Yes, but for clarity for the public, to say that we have a liability is like saying we have a mortgage. I think what you're saying with this slide is we have a mortgage payment today of in the neighborhood of $11.8 million. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so we're paying cash
Yes.
today of $11.8 million.
Yes.
And we're saying if we choose these other things, we'll still have a payment just at a different interest rate. So we're not really taking on new additional debt beyond the debt that we're already, the payment that we're already making.
That is correct.
Okay. Now I got another off-the-wall question. It's an election year. Wild things happen during election year because one thing the market likes is certainty and interest rates and investments. I think back to 2008 when things were going to change and Affordable Care Act was being talked about and corporate investment kind of froze. The whole market just kind of said, let's wait and see who's going to end up making policy. Are we in a situation like that today, in your opinion? Is this the right time to be thinking about that, or should we wait to see what the new policy, or if it's a different policy? What's your opinions on an election year impact?
I think you hit the nail on the head. There's always some uncertainty related to election year on the investment side. The difficulty with a pension obligation bond is you have really two issues that you have to optimize, and oftentimes they work in opposite directions. You want to lower the total cost of borrowing, in other words, the lowest interest rate. At the same time, you'd like to be able to make sure that you invest monies while the market is still moving up. And if you invest it at one point and then it goes down, that is not ideal. We will, at some point, talk about these mitigation strategies, the best of which is to try to do something like dollar cost averaging, which is to invest over time or to do it in series. We're trying to keep this presentation simple. I just noted we will come back and talk about this in more detail, but there are strategies. At this point, what we want to do is get the legal authority and then talk about what the market looks like and the strategies we can implement. But that's exactly our biggest issue or concern, is how to approach this from a strategic perspective to address that one potential risk.
Let's talk about the $8 million reserve. I think what Mr. Mitchell is saying, look, we owe $204 million. So if we applied $8 million towards a $204 million liability, it's not really going to change our graph much. Is that correct?
Yes, only if you saved it and said one year we had a big downturn and like, I have that $21 million year, I can apply it. I think that's probably one of the better ways, is that true emergency reserve to help on a budgetary perspective. But if you prepaid $8 million, even in the greatest case, you would save about $20 million in total payments, but that chart would not look dramatically different.
Okay. My final question has to do with, who wouldn't want to refinance at 3.5% instead of 7%? Why don't more communities do this?
That's a really good question. I think there's one simple answer to that. In 2008, the GFOA wrote a recommendation to not issue pension obligation bonds. And it's important to understand the GFOA is the large organization for government finance officers. And they write that as a national policy for the smallest parish in Louisiana as well as the city of New York. And most of it is written for the smallest parish in Louisiana. And what had happened back in those days, and I should note I was on the National Debt Advisory Committee for the GFOA, was that there were a number of bad practices, bad financial practices, and there was also some changes in the bonds subsequently. So if I may, I'm going to go to this real quickly.
Well, we're getting into secret slides at this point.
Well, they limited how many. There we go. Okay. I do this a number of times, and I have a number of slides in the appendix because we get these same questions. So these are the 5 main points that we talked about. If you do not mind, I'll go over them real quickly. The first one we're talking about and you asked as well, does it increase the debt burden, reduce capacity and flexibility? One, GASB 68 already puts the liability on the books. Two, UAL payments in California, where we don't care what happens in Illinois or Maryland or another state, are fixed dollar payments. So no, it does not increase capacity, and it already looks and acts and smells like a loan. Two, they had make-whole call features in the old days, and this is a standard provision in the corporate bond market. A make-whole call feature basically tells an institutional investor, if you want to refinance your bonds or turn them in, you have to pay me what I would have made over time. It made it uneconomical for you to refinance it. Unlike typical tax-exempt municipal bonds that have a 10-year call feature that you pay a 102, a 1%, a 2% premium, and you can refinance them at a lower interest rate. The market has hence evolved, and every single bond thereafter, pension obligation bond, now has a 10-year, almost all, have a 10-year call feature. 3, and it says, finance normal costs or extend repayment periods. Now, this was the part I was telling about the poor financial management practices. And as a simple rule of thumb, I call it the Detroit rule. Don't do anything the city of Detroit does. They would finance normal costs, extend 10-year payments into 30-year payments. That's like buying your car on a 15-year payment plan, right? That's right. Deputy Mayor said, no, those things you should not do. This is not what this council and staff is contemplating. But people can take out reverse mortgages, take out all the equity on the home, and make poor financial decisions using a financing mechanism. And that is what happened in the past. So as long as you don't do those things, as long as you're, in fact, shortening the repayment period, not extending payments, and also not doing complex instruments, derivatives, swaps, auction rate securities, but rather plain vanilla fixed rate bonds for a fixed liability, you're not going to get yourself into those type of problems. Number 4, and this talks about what staff has done in their approach, is it has to be part of a comprehensive plan to address pension shortfalls. And the other one is part of pension reform. We know pension reform has already taken place with PEPRA. They've reduced that. And the plan that we're talking about, we've mentioned these components that we're starting. It's not just the POBs, but looking at a pension funding policy and other financing mechanisms. Now, the last we've addressed, and we'll address at some other point, which is if invested at one point, you could lose some of the money and jeopardize some of the savings. As we noted, you will know what the total impact, whether it was a good deal or bad, at the end of 25 years. But there is some hedging mechanisms, namely to invest either in series or some type of dollar cost averaging. So those are the reasons, and it takes study and time to think about this, which you are doing. So there are a number of clients working on this. I am working on 7 of these transactions personally at this time and have a number of others in the pipeline. So I think they're starting to get there. It's just, I think you are correct about the timing of the election may have some impact, but people are starting to get there because that's the other part. Time is working against them. They keep on making these payments, and it's going from $12 million to $14 million, and it's going to keep on going up. Any further questions?
This might be a rudimentary question, but I think it's important for the public to know. Does the state of California make payments towards these pension liabilities?
Yes, they have their own liabilities.
Okay.
Absolutely. Maybe you saw my presentation in the Independent Cities Conference. So people ask this one. The viability of a state-funded solution. Is there going to be
I don't put much confidence in the state of California to do it. I want to make sure that our strategy isn't banking on the state doing it.
Thank you so much for a guy who's been working in California public finance. They seem to have some issues, but let's put some numbers to it.
Sure.
All the local agencies, $90 billion. State of California, $300 billion for its own individual liabilities. That's its own employees, the state troopers, CalSTRS, its OPEB, which is funded at 1%. So the likelihood that they're going to be able to solve their financial issue and have money left aside for us is not very likely.
Okay.
And I think I have one more slide. Oh, I don't. The last one goes to each time they have a financial downturn, which I think all of you may remember. We've had ERAF, we've had RDA. They seem to like to come back to the local municipalities to help balance their budget. So you do have the approach I would strongly recommend is we solve it ourselves.
So then you may have answered my second question inadvertently. We're not banking on the rate of return on the investments that the CalPERS board's investment strategy is. I may have butchered that question.
You're hoping that they return a 7% rate so we level our payments. But I believe one of the things that Graham and the rest of the staff has said is we're going to run some recession scenarios and anticipate what might happen.
Okay.
But the second part, maybe what you're asking is, can we out-earn this problem? That is not likely.
My question was, well, yes, that's a good point. I've heard that the board for CalPERS has changed their investment strategy due to ideological reasons, which would yield less of a return. Have you heard that, or are they changing? Is that a change that has been made?
Well, this is always kind of a difficult question to answer. I had lunch with a board member yesterday. So they've always had some ideological bent. I think that's some issue that some have, but I don't know if that impacts performance as greatly as people anticipate.
Okay.
That's one. Two, they have very diverse holdings, and if you're taking a look at, if someone were to ask how much of these policy-directed investments are those that, probably a very small percentage are those at risk. Most of it is regular bonds and other types of investments. Sometimes what they have are minority-owned investment firms and some type of green initiatives, but it's not like 20% or 10% of the portfolio is invested as such.
Understood. Thank you.
You're welcome. That's their asset allocation right there.
Just a couple quick questions. So you analogize this as refinancing a house, right?
Yes.
Do cities ever get in trouble? Because I know people sometimes get in trouble. They refinance their house for good reasons, and then they see a jacuzzi they want, or a boat, and they start buying things they can't afford with kind of fake money. Do cities ever get in trouble with that?
Absolutely. The city of Detroit is my favorite example. Absolutely. But in all earnestness, I think that's why you have that pension funding policy, and you have a staff that's very concerned about that. Note, and there's one other thing that's important to say, this is an actual cash flow savings. You're really deferring future costs. So what a POB would likely do is lock in your savings or your annual payments at around $12 million. So from a budgetary perspective, even though you might be saving $10, $11, $7 million out in the future, those aren't really monies that it doesn't change the basis of your budget. Does that make sense?
Right. It's not sitting in the bank.
That's right. It's deferred cost. I saved money by not having to pay additional costs, but my payments might be locked in at 12 or 13 or $10 million.
So that leads me to my next question. This graph is perfect because we've been talking for a couple of years now about what's going to happen as year over year we start paying massive amounts more to CalPERS. Will this change that scenario? Will we have to pay less? Will that stop us from getting to that $21 million mark?
Yes, I hope so. My thumb is too strong. Okay, let me see if we have. That is an illustration of what potential savings might look like under a pension obligation bond. So what it does is it lops off the mountain. But it's important to note, as I mentioned before, that if you have this type of savings, you also have to anticipate that you may have additional bases or additional payments you may have to make. So this is not static. You may have additional payments such as that. And that's one of the things we'll talk about in a further discussion, if you'd like. But yes, it knocks off the top of the mountain, so makes it more affordable.
Is it a smoothing mechanism?
Well, no, really what it is, well, yeah, we structure the payments to essentially provide level debt service payments.
All right, last question, and this all sounds like a great idea to me. I'm kind of searching my mind to look for the downsides of this because I think that's part of our responsibility. What happens if cities all over California and perhaps the nation go into a state of bankruptcy because they can no longer make these payments? And there's decisions made in bankruptcy court that says, okay, you only have to pay 60% now of your pension obligations. If we pay for it up front, does that cut us out of that process?
I'm going to try to skirt around this, Brian, a little, but only say one thing. Well, why don't you mention that first? I think it's better.
So there's been case law about this, and you know, in Stockton, San Bernardino, and other places where the obligation to CalPERS was not disavowed in the bankruptcy court. However, pension obligation bond obligations in San Bernardino, those bond owners got zero or very little in the case of the San Bernardino bankruptcy. It was an unsecured obligation. So the fact that you chose to participate in this, and God forbid a financial catastrophe happens to the city, I don't think it really changes your outcome. If anything, it might enhance your outcome out of a bankruptcy in the fact that pension obligation bonds are truly an unsecured obligation, and then courts in San Bernardino County have determined that those were not subject to be. They were the city was not obligated to make all the payments on those bonds as part of the bankruptcy proceedings. If that answers your question.
Yeah, I think it does.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Gary.
It seems to me that we're close to historic interest rates, low interest rates. I guess the market's already built in the Fed lowering rates one more time, perhaps, and maybe even another if this coronavirus thing gets worse. So it seems we might be borrowing money if this comes online in 6 months or so at a really historic low rate, and then we're locked in for 10 years, right? Because there's a 10-year call?
Well, oh, yes. But you don't, if in fact that's historically low rates, you get that for 20, 25 years. That's like having a mortgage at 2%. Most people would not refinance or have the ability to refinance a 2 or 3% mortgage.
Right.
The option to refinance is always the issuer's option to refinance. And so what happens is, you know, if you borrow for 25 years, 25-year debt is cost this much. As the term gets shorter, it usually becomes cheaper to borrow for a shorter period of time. So after the 10-year call, the debt is a shorter period, and usually it can be refinanced for savings. Yeah.
Yeah, because interest rates can't go a whole lot lower than zero. I mean, we're
Just
getting
talking
down
about
close to that now.
A concept called rolling down the curve, and because the yield curve is so flat, in other words, there's almost no differential between a 10 and a 30-year rate. Normally, you might pay, on a tax-exempt bond, you pay 1% for a 5-year, 2% for a 10-year, and 3%, 3.5%, 20, 30-year. So as it gets shorter and shorter, you get some advantage. Right now, the yield curve looks like this. It's almost flat between 10 and 30 years, so there's not much advantage. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that comes.
I will
to
provide, and I'll note to provide an illustration of historical rates and the yield curve shape in our next presentation.
And the other thing, it seems that a lot of foreign money is coming in right now for safe haven. That's driving down rates, and this might be a good time for us to do a refinance.
Absolutely, and I think one of the advantages is to who you actually sell the bonds to. I think pension obligation bonds are seen as quasi-sovereign debt. So you might have some institutional investors from outside of the borders, international investors, who want to invest in the United States, are overburdened with U.S. treasuries, but would like to find a comparable municipality, which is like a quasi-sovereign, and don't have the advantage of that tax-exempt status. So POBs are very attractive to international investors.
Right. Thank you.
Bob?
You are welcome. And
I read an article the other day about interest rates continuing to go down, and the fact they're talking about negative interest rates to where you would earn interest on your mortgage rather than paying interest on your mortgage and things of that nature.
That's a great point, and that goes, Councilmember, hand in hand with the international investors. Where we see those negative rates are in other countries.
Right, exactly.
So if you're earning a negative rate, and you might see what is a low rate to us, but a 2 or 3% in the United States for a quasi-sovereign debt, it makes it very attractive, and hopefully to you means more demand and a lower interest rate for you as a borrower.
Right. They were talking about it, possibility that it could even come over here.
I know, I think in Japan they've had that for a number of periods. I don't know, but rates are, I've been in this business 25 years, they're as low as I've ever seen them.
I agree with you because I was in business for 50 years, and I remember paying 22% interest when they Jimmy
Yes.
Carter was in office.
I will say the one downside to this, of course, is the benefit of low interest rates. Is the flip side to that is we have a harder time gaining on the investment return side.
Exactly.
So that's the flip side of the coin.
Well, thank you. That was very, very helpful, and we appreciate you taking the time. And
Thank you. So,
at this point, I don't think we have any more questions, but we may call you back if need be.
well, I think, Graham, do you want to go over those last recommendations?
Certainly. So, Mr. Mayor and Council, if there's no more questions, there are 4 recommendations associated with this agenda item. One is that this council directs staff to begin the validation process through the judiciary to issue POBs. Now, remember, that's just the validation process. We would come back at a later date to actually talk about what size and to what level, and there's some laddering opportunities. So we would have more of a more of a complete package at that time. If the council wanted us to proceed with the validation process, we would need to get council authorization for me to enter the city into an agreement with Stradling to actually commence that process. We would also recommend that the council direct staff to establish a Section 115 trust fund with PARs, and then finally direct staff to come back with a more comprehensive city-wide pension policy to help give us some fiscal discipline during the good years and the bad. Mm-hmm. So staff's here to entertain any questions about those.
Council, any questions? Steve?
I got a question on number 3. That's kind of like a big move forward, it seems like. The others are kind of, let's keep going, and this one's like, yeah, let's actually do something. What can you talk about that?
Certainly. This would be to take the $8 million that we currently have sitting in our general fund reserve and put that into the Section 115 trust. That it just protects it. At this point, we don't have an investment policy that would allow us to be very aggressive. So at the meantime, we would be pretty conservative our investment, but we'd get some direction from council to how they would want that invested. But getting it into the Section 115 trust would be that first step.
I think that's key. I don't think we want to be risky with that money at all right now. I think we want to give you some flexibility, but certainly don't want to start taking risks at this point.
When you say it protects it, if there were a different council a few years from now that wanted to spend that money, would that be out of their reach?
It would be out of their reach.
That's good. Okay. So what you're talking about, yeah.
How liquid is that money? What my concern is that let's say there's a recession, relatively severe. I don't want to have to be laying off police, fire, and paramedics because we don't have the money. So I want to be able to have access to that money so we don't have catastrophic layoffs where the safety of the public is impacted.
So I'm going to let Mr. Morales address part of that. I'll address the second half of that. Because there's 2 parts to that.
I'll just directly address the liquidity of these investments. They are pretty much focused on at least 50% fixed income securities, which are highly liquid. These are high yielding investments. High credit investments, usually double rate better. But you can, with PARs, the main advantage is you can actually create a customized investment portfolio and direct it in the investments that you want. Ideally, they should be something different than you did under the California Code. Otherwise, you're not taking full advantage of some slightly higher investing. But you're not looking at high-risk investments. You usually put them in something to maintain that cushion and support.
And then in terms of protecting the city, in the event of a massive recession, these funds can only be used for PERS payments. But remember, PERS payments make up a big percentage of our general fund. So you could allocate more money out of this fund to pay your PERS costs that could then protect the general fund. So there are some ways to utilize that money in the event of an emergency. But again, there's an advantage because theoretically a Section 115 trust could be used 100% for all your PERS payments 1 year, and you could wipe that trust fund out in 1 year, and a future city council could do that. So there was some value in having the policy that we'll be bringing forward address some of those factors.
More questions?
So to understand, you're saying if in a future year we use that fund to pay the PERS payment in lieu of general fund paying the PERS payment, that's what we're talking about, right?
That's correct.
If we end up with a good year and have more money to put in this fund, can we put that in immediately into the 115, or do we have to set it aside again with the?
No, that works immediately, kind of like how your other investment funds. PARS is right here in Southern California. Clay would wire over the money in the direction. You can establish it, he said, in a ladder and a different type of investment, or you could decide to prepay a portion of your UAL. You can use the money however you want, but certainly you can. You can wire it over overnight.
Thank you.
More questions? All right, thanks, Graham. All right, let's see if we have any speaker cards for this item.
We do, sir. We have one speaker, Ms. Bonnie Price.
Hi, Bonnie.
Hi. I just have two questions. This is a very good presentation, by the way. So a lot of my questions were answered. I'm just wondering, how long has this unfunded situation been in existence? And when was the last time a property tax was increased to help pay for this?
Mr. Mayor, I can answer the second part.
Yeah.
One is a property tax increase would require a vote of the people. We have not done a property tax increase to do this, and I don't even know if state law would even allow us to do that.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Okay.
The first half of the question is how long has this existed? I don't know the exact year, but it's existed for many, many years. The change of why we're talking about it today where we weren't before is that PEPRA reform that went into effect where it all became more transparent. So before, our unfunded liability was just lumped in with our normal costs, and we didn't really know how much was what. Under the PEPRA, now we have these distinct funds, these distinct liabilities, and Mr. Morales showed that great graph that showed, or the pie chart that showed that amount. That's what one of the advantages of PEPRA. So it's allowed us to actually have a more intelligent conversation around it.
Okay, got the answer. I just want to make a point. Those who live in the unincorporated areas have no choice. 2% increase on your property per year. No choice. Thank you.
We get a 2% increase in living in the city also, so it's the same. It's no different unless we had a recession and the property values went down and they were reappraised at a lower value, like they did during the 07-08 time period.
Gary?
Well, actually, the way it works with the property taxes is under Prop 13, which passed back in 78 and 79, that the assessed value can't go up more than 2% per year, with the exception that if the California Consumer Price Index goes up less than 2%, it will, like it did for several years during the Great Recession, it cannot exceed the California Consumer Price Index. So there are many years where there was maybe 1% increase in the assessed value. And then if the value of the property goes down, the assessor can never put a value on it that's more than what the market value is at that time. So the entire state is treated the same.
We're lucky to have Councilmember Kendrick. He's got a master's degree in real estate, also worked for the county assessor's office for about 80 years. So, all right, good. Are there any other cards?
No more cards, sir.
Okay, then. We don't have to close the public hearing, so we can have more discussion or we can have a motion. I think we've asked a lot of really pertinent questions. I think it's certainly worth kicking it back to staff so they can work with this and bring it back to us and see what our options are.
I think that's a good idea. Anytime you can refinance a debt to a lower level, that's something a prudent investor or debt ower would do. The key is, what do you do with the savings? And if you believe in smaller government, then you take those savings and you put those back into paying down your debt. If you believe in bigger government, use those savings to create more government programs. I think we kind of believe we ought to pay down our debt because that's money we owe people who have worked for us, and that's a better use of that money than to create new social programs here in the city. So I'd like to at least send some direction with the intent of using the savings to pay down debt.
I think we were all in agreement about that, and looks like there are ways to structure it so that it can be sheltered and safe.
Morgan, do we need 4 separate motions?
No, you can make, if you'd like to accept the recommendation, you can make one motion to approve the recommendation in its entirety.
Motion to approve the recommendation in its entirety?
Second.
Moved and second. Please vote.
Motion carries by unanimous vote.
Well, thank you, John, for coming, and thank you for all the hard work you've put into this. Item 11 is my activities report, and is as reported. There is no legislative report on today's agenda. And we're now at activity report for the council members. Councilmember Kendrick.
As reported.
Councilmember McClellan. As reported. Councilmember Goebel.
As reported.
And Deputy Mayor Phil Ortiz.
As reported, I want to make a quick note. Tomorrow, there will be 10 U.S. Army future soldiers being sworn in here in the council chambers from our very own Army recruitment station here in El Cajon. They just surpassed their recruitment goals, first time done in almost 10 years. And they're going to be sworn in live from the International Space Station from a colonel that's there.
Wow.
First time in the city of El Cajon that anyone's talked to anyone in space. So look for maybe some members of our media can report on it, but I thought that was a neat event that's going to happen here tomorrow.
Are you coming to that?
I hope to make it.
All right. Nice.
Time was just changed. It's in the morning, 9:30 to 11:30, I think is the time frame. I'm not sure what time people in space have in their schedule, so yeah.
All right, there are no joint council member reports on today's agenda. Item 17 is a report on donations to the animal shelter in the month of January, and that was $724.24. We have no first or second readings of ordinances on today's agenda, and that brings us to closed session. Our city attorney, we will ask him to recite the title and lead us into closed session.
Thank you, Mayor. The City Council will be meeting in closed session for one item, a conference with real property negotiators pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.8. The location of the property is 1373 North Marshall Avenue. The negotiating party is the San Diego Humane Society. The city's negotiators are the city manager, the assistant city manager, and city attorney. And under negotiation will be price and terms for a lease of all or part of the property.
I'll make a motion then to enter into closed session.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Please vote.
Motion carries by unanimous vote.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be just a short period of time for closed session. We'll come back and conclude the council meeting.
Thank you, Mayor. The City Council met in closed session on item 18 and gave direction to its negotiators.
This brings us to adjournment. The adjourned regular joint meeting of the El Cajon City Council and El Cajon Housing Authority held this 25th day of February 2020 is adjourned till Tuesday, February 25th, 2020 at 7 o'clock p.m. Thank you.